America, welcome to our show. It's Monday, May 13th, 2013. We start of a brand new week. We have got so much stuff to share with you today. We're going to get right into it. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny's in the control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phones when you call on. In a couple of program notes. 1 week from today, May 20th, Cindy Sheehan will be our on-air guest talking about her recent bike ride across America, more for anti-war activism. We're going to be talking with her about that. We're going to have her for a whole half hour. 2 weeks from today, on the 28th, Richard Mack will be coming back to talk about their convention for the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers of America, and we're going to be talking about that kind of stuff. Obviously, the big news today, especially if you're watching Fox News, is that the IRS scandal is really starting to explode. And it basically started out with the IRS saying that they had been looking into the tax status of various nonprofits, specifically the Tea Party. Now it's starting to blossom. It looks like it was a blanket across-the-board attack, political repression against anybody who questioned the government. Now they're now talking about the IRS was targeting activists who simply talk about the Constitution and the constitutionality of certain laws, including those involving the tax itself. And so this went way beyond merely the Tea Party and extended to all conservative and dissident groups. It is extraordinarily wide-ranging, and this is a huge, huge scandal. We're going to get into some of the details on that one, but I want to share a thought with you. Okay, the IRS has already admitted they did this. It was kind of disingenuous for Obama during his press conference with Cameron just a little while ago to say, if these allegations are true. They are not allegations. The IRS admitted they were targeting patriot groups, the Tea Party, the Occupy movement, anybody who's out there talking about the condition of the nation, questioning the official story, questioning the constitutionality of our current government. They were all being targeted. And I'll give you the backside of the scandal. Nobody on the corporate media has even mentioned yet. If the IRS was specifically targeting political enemies, I think it's a safe assumption they were turning a blind eye to the political friends and just letting them off scot-free with whatever they were doing with hiding their taxes and so forth. Remember, audits against large corporations by the IRS dropped 18% this last year. So that's the backside of this whole scandal. Now, Obama, in his conference just now with Cameron, made the statement, he is now on record saying that he only learned of the IRS targeting of his political critics within the society only last Friday. He's on record saying he didn't know about it before Friday. I don't think anybody's buying that one. I certainly am not. Do you really think the IRS are going to go out and start targeting Obama's political enemies without Obama's tacit approval to do that? I mean, we're in Richard Nixon territory here. And what they're saying now is the top IRS officials knew this was going on 2 years ago, and yet they denied it under oath before Congress. So we've already got the IRS leadership caught in a lie before Congress, ready for the perp walk on that one. Does anybody here really think these IRS officials decided to engage in this blatantly illegal activity all on their own? I don't think so. And so this is a huge scandal, and the question we're all asking now is, what did the president know, and when did he know it? Because using the IRS as a political weapon was one of the counts in the impeachment proceedings that were getting ready against Richard Nixon, and he headed that off only by resigning from office. We'll talk about that after we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And so now the Obama administration is provably into Richard Nixon level of criminality. Remember, one of the articles of impeachment that was being prepared against Richard Nixon was that he used the Internal Revenue Service as a political tool to go after his enemies. There was an enemies list at work in the IRS then and today. And probably most of you listening to this radio show and contributing to Republic Broadcasting or to WhatReallyHappened.com were probably on it. Now, Nixon didn't go through impeachment. He resigned first. And the reason for that has to do with something I said last week, and I'm going to repeat it now because you need to keep it in mind as you see the official propaganda unfold. In Washington, D.C., in politics, there are two kinds of secrets. There are the little tiny secrets that are made public as a means of warfare between political rivals. This candidate is having sex with his receptionist, and that candidate over there took a bribe, and this candidate over here has a secret financial relationship, and blah, blah, blah. And you can hurl those charges back and forth as political weapons, but it doesn't threaten the system as a whole. Then there are the great secrets. Secrets so terrible that if revealed to the general public, it would delegitimize the entire government, every party, every gender, every race, creed, and color, and those secrets are kept by everyone. Even your own worst enemies try and keep those secrets from coming out, because it's going to spoil the party for everybody. And Richard Nixon resigned ahead of impeachment, because if he'd gone to impeachment, at some point somebody was going to ask the obvious question. With Richard Nixon's re-election, a study in foregone conclusions, why burglarize the Democratic headquarters at the Watergate hotel? Tells you what I think about Washington, D.C. And, of course, the answer to that question would have just blown the lid off the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and that would have brought the whole government down, Democrat and Republican alike, and that is a great secret. And you want to keep that in mind, because both behind this IRS story and Benghazi, there is a great secret being hidden. Now, Susan Collins is over there on Newsmax saying that she's not buying the rogue agent's claim, and neither am I. I don't see anybody at the IRS taking it onto themselves to go out and target the patriot groups for extra tax scrutiny on their own. These are just bureaucrats. They're not political. They're just after the money. Somebody directed this. And now Obama is on record saying that the first he learned of it was last Friday, and the instant that is proven to be a lie, it's going to get really, really spectacular. Now, moving on down here, let's see. One of the senators backed by the Tea Party, Marco Rubio, has called for the resignation of the current acting IRS Commissioner, Stephen Miller. I don't think so. That's what they're going to nail somebody at the IRS, and this is just an acting commissioner. He's not even the full commissioner. They're going to throw him to the wolves and say everybody else is off scot-free. I don't think so. This scandal taints the entire Internal Revenue Service, because it wasn't just the commissioner doing this. And the commissioner, in all probability, was acting under orders exactly the same as happened under Richard Nixon. So this taints the entire income tax system. We've all been told that the IRS is all about raising revenue for the government, even though the government just borrows and spends at will. And it is made palatable by the idea that everybody is treated equally by the Internal Revenue Service. Obviously, that is provably not true. The IRS has admitted they were targeting these patriot groups. And so what that tells us is the IRS is not about raising revenue for the federal government. It is one of the systems of control. We're going to take all your money away from you, and we'll give you some of it back as long as you behave and, more importantly, spend in a manner approved of by the United States government. They're using your money to control and coerce your behavior. And now, of course, the IRS is revealed as a tool of political repression. And this thing is continuing to grow and grow as it becomes more and more obvious that the IRS wasn't just targeting the Tea Party. They targeted the Occupy movement. They targeted anybody who was out. People talking about the Constitution were targeted by the IRS. And I'll tell you what's going to happen as this scandal grows. You're going to find more and more Americans willing to go back and take a much closer look at the IRS and the Federal Reserve, and whether or not they are really constitutional or not. And if anybody starts digging into those issues, they're in for a very rude awakening if they are not already aware of all the problems that are out there. And if you have 330 million Americans aware that the 16th Amendment wasn't actually ratified, and that even had it been ratified, the United States Supreme Court ruled it did not give Congress any new taxing authority, what's the IRS going to do? Target 330 million Americans for punitive measures? I don't think that's going to happen. All right, now moving on to Benghazi, because this thing is really starting to heat up, and apparently Obama just came out with a statement saying, there's no there, pay no attention to Benghazi, there's nothing to think about, we'll arrange a bloody shooting somewhere like New Orleans to distract you from that. And a lot of people are very worried. You know, Obama's dealing with a double whammy here. He's got the IRS scandal, reminding everybody of the evils of Richard Nixon. And I'm sure the Republicans would love to have a Democratic president that they could point to whenever anybody points to Richard Nixon. No, you're the party of Richard Nixon. Well, you're the party of Barack Obama. And then the fistfights start. So Obama's dealing with that, and he's dealing with Benghazi, and both of them are major, major scandals. And the fact that they're arriving together, each one fuels anger and curiosity about the other. If they'd arrived one at a time, Obama probably could have ridden them out. But both hitting at the same time, that's a tough, tough problem for him to solve. And a lot of people are thinking, get ready for a new false flag bang to take everybody's mind off of Benghazi and the IRS and get us all back into this war mode over there for wherever we're supposed to be invading next. But remember what I said about little secrets versus big secrets? Well, there's a big secret behind Benghazi. My theory is, and this is supported by the revelations, that Obama ordered the CIA and the special forces to stand down and not go to the rescue of the ambassador, is that it was a stage-managed publicity stunt to help him win re-election. And it got out of control. The Libyans living around the consulate heard the gunfire, and they all just decided to join on in. And this carefully stage-managed play turned into an uncontrolled riot. The ambassador was killed, and this carefully stage-managed publicity stunt turned into an epic fail. And now everybody's trying to backpedal from this whole thing, and they're trying to de-link and basically make it as harmless as possible to protect the big secret. Because it's one thing for our government to have a failure dealing with a terror attack, and quite another to find out the government set it all up to make political points. And more people are saying Benghazi ought to be just as large as the Watergate scandal. And so should the IRS story. Now, Mike Rogers is already out there saying there will be more Benghazi whistleblowers. They're already talking about blanket immunity for all the lower-level people to come up and say this is what was going on. And it's very interesting to look at the corporate media and see who is really giving this a lot of coverage and who's staying away. It came out over the weekend that the top executives at ABC and CBS actually have family members working within the White House. So they're all going to be very pro, let's make this story go away. There's really nothing big about that. Fox, of course, is covering Benghazi because they see this as an opportunity to damage Hillary in 2016. CNN spent all morning on the Castro brothers and, how they were unfairly maligned for the actions related to the Ohio kidnapping. And, of course, now we know there actually is a cover-up because the talking points about Benghazi were heavily edited by the White House to take out all references to terrorism. And everybody's saying, why'd you take that out? That was the obvious thing to blame this on. Well, because remember, we were all told that this act of terror against Benghazi was in response to this Mohammed-bashing movie. Well, they have to let that story go because, remember, there never really was a movie. There was just a trailer that came out on YouTube just days before Benghazi, and there was never a real movie. They took another movie, very poorly made, and they overdubbed it and edited it to make the trailer and tried to blame on that. Well, if they keep that storyline going, that it was all because of this movie, somebody's going to say, well, let's look at the movie. And when they say, well, there really isn't one, again, the cover-up is completely blown. So they've lost control of this story. They really, really have. Alrighty, now then, back to some events over the weekend. We had another mass shooting down in New Orleans at the Mother's Day Parade celebration. And this was briefly heavy news, and it's already started to fade away. It's fading away as fast as that Texas fertilizer explosion because it's not politically useful. So there were, I think the last number they had was 17 people were shot and wounded. Nobody died. That right there makes it unnewsworthy. The youngest victim of the shooting was 10 years old, who was grazed by a bullet. And it's very interesting, and, you know, the first response I had when I saw this thing is, oh, just when the gun grabbers need more bloody shirts to wave around. But, again, the lessons to take away from New Orleans. The police were not able to prevent the crime, and they were actually there on the scene in the crowd itself when it happened. More about this when we come back from these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and let's see. There we are. We're talking about this tragic shooting down at the Mother's Day Parade in New Orleans. 3 shooters, police unable to intervene even though they were standing right there. It is a reminder that this claim that we can surrender all of our guns to the gun grabbers and the police will take care of us is an absolute outright lie. In this case, the police actually were there when this crime was committed, weren't able to stop it. The 3 suspects got away, and that was kind of the end of the story. And earlier today they were saying that they're still seeking these gunmen and suspects, and they had no new information. Then, just before we went to air, a video surfaced showing one of the shooters. Security camera video posted to the internet was sent to us, clearly shows one of the shooters. And it's a black gentleman. And I know what the reaction from the corporate TV news is going to be, well, heck, if we can't use this to demonize the Arabs, this is a non-starter. And I'm willing to bet this story will just fade away very, very quickly because it's not useful to the war agenda. And, of course, the cops are not impressing anybody with their acumen. It was a very interesting story out of Ingenious Press about an LAPD officer who pulled over a student and gave him a breathalyzer test, and the breathalyzer indicated a .018, and the cop said, well, that's double the limit of .08. For those of you who've actually studied mathematics, you will understand what a complete and total moron the LAPD officer was being. The student, who was a physics student, tried to explain to the officer how mathematics works to the right of the decimal point. And double the limit of .08 would be .16, not .018. This student was nowhere near the legal limit for alcohol, let alone double the limit, and the officer still wrote him a citation, and it's going to go to court. And the judge is going to look down at that officer and say, did you actually finish grade school? And it just sort of tells you the kind of people that they have in those police departments right now. Up in New York, something that's got a lot of people very, very concerned, they've started putting up posters, mock posters, trying to sort of pre-sell the idea of a potential terror attack in the subways. What could happen if a colorless, odorless gas got into the subway and you would all die horribly? And people are very, very alarmed at this advertising public relations campaign because of the upcoming simulated chemical attack the New York Police Department is planning on carrying out. In fact, this is in July. It's going to be the largest ever simulated chemical attack. And we know that very often, when we're saying very often, every time there's one of these so-called terror attacks, it's always right on top of a simulated drill. There was a bombing drill going on in Boston. There was a subway terror drill going on London 7/7. FEMA was actually in New York City the night before 9/11 for a drill. And for the New York police to be putting up posters to remind everybody how scared and panicky they have to be in the event of a chemical attack just before a drill simulating a chemical attack. And again, like I said, with Benghazi blowing up in his face, with IRS Gate now becoming a national scandal that's reviving memories of Richard Nixon and what a criminal White House he was, the government's desperate for something where they can change the focus, change the narrative. Now, Adam Kokesh, the man who's calling for an armed march into Washington, D.C. on July 4th, and the D.C. police have already said they're going to meet them at the borders and arrest them. Adam's getting a lot of coverage. He was on CBS in Washington, D.C. He's getting a lot of corporate media coverage for this stunt, and as of the last report, he intends to go forward with it, despite criticism from everybody in the independent media that this is obviously the potential for a staged incident. agent provocateurs working for the United States government join this march. They get into Washington, D.C., and they start shooting up something, the Jefferson Memorial or the Washington Monument. It's already been cracked from that earthquake. Or shoot at the White House, and then all of a sudden Obama has his excuse to declare martial law, suspend the Second Amendment, and start grabbing the guns, which is, we know they're desperate to do that. And it's a bad idea. Please do not get involved in Adam Kokesh's stunt, regardless of whether Adam himself is legit or not. We know the U.S. government is figuring, how can we turn this into a horrible tragedy that we can use to convince Americans that they can live without their guns? Meanwhile, as the official story of Boston continues to fall apart at the seams, they're trying to basically sell the idea the Tsarnaev brothers are evil to the American public by going back to this murder that took place several years ago of 3 men, and apparently it involved marijuana. And they're trying to say, oh, the Tsarnaev brothers, they're the ones who did it. It was an unsolved murder. And they're basing this on the fact that there is a forensic link between the Tsarnaev brothers and these 3 murdered victims, forgetting the fact that it's already been acknowledged one of the victims was friends with the Tsarnaev brothers. And so there was quite probably benign contact between them on an ongoing basis that is not suitable for, an accusation of murder. They're just piling on the charges to keep the demonization going. These are bad people. Pay no attention to any suggestion they might be innocent. They're guilty of something. We're victorious. We're going to be right back. America, welcome back to the show. And the media is making a big deal over the fact that during Obama's conference with Cameron, when he was asked about Benghazi, Obama managed a little tear to fall out of his eye and trickle down his cheek. So I put that story up there, and to it I linked the video from Bill Clinton at Ron Brown's funeral, where he was caught on tape coming out of the funeral laughing and chuckling, and as soon as he sees the photographers, he puts his head down and he looks really sad. It's all acting. That's what politics is, acting. Letting the public see what the public wants to see and then go on doing about whatever it is you want to do here. Now, getting back to the police. Up in Detroit, because of budgetary cuts, the police department has had to stop responding to 911 calls. And a private firm has now stepped in to pick up the slack because people in Detroit were complaining. They were calling 911 and they were getting busy signals and on hold and just nothing was going through. So they've got this private firm there, kind of wonder how they're being funded. And I can imagine up in Detroit you're going to call 911 and you're going to get a recording that says, hello, you've reached 911 Plus, the private emergency service. Before we connect you to one of our emergency operators, we would like to inform you of a great opportunity to purchase fire, burglary, and medical insurance in our group discount plan, blah, 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 blah. So that's how it's going to be. You're calling because your house is on fire, you're being raped, or you're being murdered, and you have to listen through 5 minutes of commercials before you can get somebody on the line who's actually going to help you with your problems. We've all been talking about drones, the police drones, and we're making a big deal about down in Texas, where they had bought this hugely expensive $300,000 drone that was weaponizable. They can send it up with a beanbag gun, a shotgun, a taser, all kinds of nasty stuff, and they put it on display over this last weekend and promptly crashed it into the SWAT team. $300,000. I'm sure the people of Texas are glad that it hit the SWAT team rather than a church or a school. Live by the drone, die by the drone. So, huge embarrassment for that. Also for Israel, apparently one of their drones wandered off course over the Mediterranean, and rather than risk somebody getting hold of it and reverse engineering its secrets, Israel had to shoot their own drone down. Not very good these devices are. Now, speaking of Israel, since we've segued very cleverly over to the Middle East here, we're seeing more and more comments coming out. This was from the Trenches World Report, how Israel's desperation to perpetuate aggression is going to lead to its ultimate destruction. Israel's government controls the people of Israel by convincing them they're always under threat from everybody around them, and that's why Israel's constantly having to attack Syria or Lebanon or Gaza or Egypt or whoever else they're invading next week. Israel can't seem to go 6 months without launching an attack on somebody around them. And ultimately, of course, it is polarizing the rest of the world against Israel and Israel's slave, the United States of America. But this is not how you survive in the 21st century. Israel continues to be very afraid of Stephen Hawking. Apparently, his boycotting of this science meeting in Israel has become a focal point for the apartheid and the boycott debate. And ADL is attacking him, and Israel's attacking him. There are some very abusive, snarky comments about Stephen Hawking on Twitter. They're making fun of his disability. And, of course, that has backflashed on Israel because the world already sees Israel as a bully against the Palestinians, a bully against the Egyptians, a bully against the Lebanese, a bully against Syria, and now they're bullying a man in a wheelchair. That does not look really good. Doesn't play in Peoria. And Stephen Hawking is showing a huge amount of courage. It's not like he needs to do anything to attract attention after his long career. He is doing this out of a genuine sense of what is morally right and wrong. And because compared to Stephen Hawking, most human beings have the IQ of a carrot, I think we ought to give him the benefit of the doubt that he may see the situation in Israel and Palestine with a clarity and perception that is lost on pretty much everybody else, including Benjamin Netanyahu and Barack Obama. Now, Stephen Hawking has no shortage of awards and prizes for his intellectual accomplishments, but on the off chance anybody from the Nobel Peace Prize Committee is listening to my broadcast, I am certain Stephen Hawking still has a little blank space on his wall that you might want to consider filling. Now, over at the Huffington Post, they're out there trying to just sell this idea that Hawking's is somehow really, really bad. As you probably remember, late last week, a lot of online media ran polls whether Hawking was right or wrong to do this. And the polls were overwhelmingly that Hawking was right to do what he was doing. So Huffington Post, raising on a busted flush, reset their poll back to 0, and then added a couple of articles arguing both sides of the debate. And then said, have you changed your mind? And it basically came out, the second Huffington Post poll, even more people said Hawking was right. And remember, we exposed last week, there was an organized campaign among Israel and its supporters. They were sending out mass emailings to all of their supporters saying, please go to this URL and vote no, please. And even with all of that organized, orchestrated attempt to overwhelm the poll, they still cratered. And so Stephen Hawking has inspired the world in a way that none of his cosmological work ever really did here. Over in Tel Aviv, another scandal. And by the way, they're dealing with massive riots over there over austerity. The Israeli people are suffering just as much as Americans or Canadians or British or anybody in any nation with a private central bank is feeling the hardship. One has to wonder, all these billions of dollars pouring into Israel, it's certainly not reaching the Israeli people. It's just vanishing into political corruption. So apparently Tel Aviv has gone on a campaign to shut down businesses run by the African migrants. Remember the Ethiopian Jews? Under the Israel's law of return, if you are Jewish anywhere on planet Earth, you are automatically allowed into Israel and made a citizen. And the Ethiopian Jews said, yeah, Israel looks better than Africa, better than Ethiopia, and they moved up there to find themselves hideously discriminated against. And apparently Tel Aviv has gone on a program to shut down businesses run by African migrants, saying that they're all illegal for some technicality or another. Now, you've probably already heard about the museum, or maybe you haven't. It's sort of a self-aggrandizing, very self-indulgent temple to the corporate media. And it basically proclaims the wonderful corporate media people and all the wonderful things they've done. And every year they have an event honoring reporters killed in the line of duty, and this year there we're going to include 2 Palestinian journalists, Mahmoud al-Kumi and Hussam Salama, who were killed in Israel's attack on Gaza last November. And they were going to honor them because they were journalists working for a corporate media outlet. Israel screamed bloody murder, saying that, no, they're not real journalists. They were working for Al-Aqsa TV, and Al-Aqsa TV isn't a real media because it's aligned with Hamas and it's not owned by America's corporate interests. And the ADL got in, the American Jewish Committee chimed in, and the museum, which represents a corporate media which is itself always a slave to Israel, backed down and took the names of these 2 journalists off the list. and basically shows the museum has no more moral compass than the corporate media that enshrines here. And it doesn't really matter because we're seeing once again, and this is coming out of Reuters, U.S. broadcast TV ratings slide. People are turning off ABC, CBS, Fox, and NBC. Not just the news programs, but even their regular broadcast. These networks are coming up on what is called the upfront, where they're going to broadcast the pilots for next season's shows and try and convince advertisers to buy in for the entire season, pay for it up front. The advertisers get a price break because of this, and the networks get a lump of cash coming in with which to produce shows without having to go to their credit lines. And the ratings are going down. They're losing audience, mostly because outside of all the obvious deceptions on the TV news, everything these days coming out of the networks, it's all politically correct. Ooh, Arabs are bad, we are good, torture is okay. They're regurgitating the same themes over and over again. There's nothing new or interesting. And this is why over on cable TV and the independent channels, reality shows about, duck decoys and looting storage lockers are actually getting higher ratings than the network TV fare. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why they're not doing very well. TV networks only advertise their shows on their own networks, and because nobody's watching, nobody even hears about the new shows. Those corporate media networks ought to be coming out to the independent media. We now have a lion's share of the audience out there. They should be advertising their shows on our websites. Now, speaking of corruption and fighting over money and fraud in Israel, apparently there's a huge scandal unfolding where $57 million was looted from one of these Holocaust funds, where people are encouraged to send money in, and we're going to use the money to take care of those Holocaust survivors, of which there seems to always be more and more and more. And apparently some of the organizers of one of these things absconded with $57 million. Meanwhile, we reported this yesterday, 2 organizations using and exploiting Anne Frank's name are in a bitter fight over possession of the actual Frank family archives. It's a repeat of a court battle they had back in 1990 over which one had the right to trademark Anne Frank's name. It's all about money and licensing, and it's deteriorated to the point where they're calling each other a revival of Nazi Germany, and it's just discrediting the whole thing. There are reasons to suspect that the diary of Anne Frank is itself an embellishment. More than a few people have pointed out, the sophistication of the writing is inconsistent with the age of Anne Frank at the time it was supposed to be written. We know there was actually a lawsuit where Anne Frank's father got sued by a ghostwriter who sort of dressed up the diary ahead of its being sold. We know that what is shown as the original pages from her diary are written in many cases in ballpoint pen, which was not available in Europe prior to the end of World War II. And it just goes on and on and on. And as we look back from our modern age, sadder but wiser, we look at Saddam's nuclear weapons. We look at all of the other lies that have come out. And we begin to realize that a huge amount of what we're taught about history in the schools, and certainly through Hollywood, it's a fiction. It didn't really happen. It is simply this created illusion to get us to think the way the powers that be want us to think. To always sympathize with Israel, even when it acts as an aggressor. To always demonize all these other people and not even waste time looking at their side of the argument. We are the most lied to people on the face of the earth. And once you understand that and arm yourself against that, you're going to be making a lot better choices in terms of who to vote for, who to give your money to, what products to buy. A skeptical people is a free people. The government and the corporations don't want you skeptical. They want you to just sit there and they'll just say whatever it is at you, global warming, and you'll just say, oh yes, I hear and I obey and I believe as I am told. And when you stop doing that, you become free, because beliefs are the chains that hold free minds enslaved. No chain of iron or steel ever bound a human being tighter than the chains made out of the beliefs with which we are indoctrinated as children. We're bribed to allow beliefs to control us. Believe in the fat man at the North Pole, you'll get a bicycle. Believe in the magic bunny rabbit, you'll get candy. And on and on and on. That's what child is all about. Bribing you, convincing you to not think, not reason, not look at the facts, just believe what you're being told by the big people. And they do this when you're too young to realize that the big people are full of it. And that's where you're really brainwashed, whether it's kindergarten or Sunday school or any of these other systems where they convince you to let belief control you rather than rationality. Because those who then control the beliefs control you. Apparently, the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Palestine, Professor Falk, visited Lebanon to find out what's really going on in the Palestinian refugee camps. And basically, he came out of that saying it is time for Israel to come clean on some of their actions against Palestine. And in fact, Falk basically said it's time for the U.S. to start withholding payments to Israel until Israel opens up its historical files. I think that takes a great deal of courage. He's probably going to lose his job next week here. Now, over in Syria, the Syrian army, Assad's forces, have regained the strategic towns in Al-Qusayr. I hope I pronounced that correctly. It's in the Homs province. They took control of it apparently last night. And they've restored security to western Damana-ish, Al-Warar, I can't even pronounce this name, and Al-Hadira towns after clashes with the foreign-backed militants. Apparently they found quite a few of the hideouts and destroyed those. Assad is winning. And I'm not the only one saying that. Over at Rimft.com, there's a headline, America is losing the covert Syria war. The U.S.-sponsored al-Nusra rebels have been defeated by Syria's government forces. This is why the U.S. is trying to come up with a reason to directly invade. Their covert overthrow has cratered. And even worse, even if it was going to succeed, most of these hired mercenaries that the U.S. armed and paid to go in there to overthrow Assad have now politically aligned with the hardcore Islamic radicals, which means the new government following this coup d'etat into power is going to be more anti-American than Assad is. And the United States doesn't want that, so they're desperate for an excuse to go in there, shoot up both sides, and declare peace, put in a new puppet government, new private central bank, Syria's oil for sale only for the U.S. dollar, and to move forward. Interesting article out of The Independent, because a lot of the talking points we get out of the United States is, how could the Syrian people be fighting for Assad when he uses chemical weapons and all the rest of that? And The Independent says, they're not fighting for Assad. They're fighting for their homes. They're fighting for Syria. And Robert Fisk is saying they're winning. They're winning. He says the government troops, because he was over there in Syria, says the government troops are confident they're winning, and they're saying they don't need chemical weapons. They're winning without them. Apparently another video has surfaced showing one of these Syrian hired mercenaries literally cutting out the heart of one of Assad's troops and at least going through the motions of chewing on it. And that may be good publicity from the point of view of the Syrian rebels, but it certainly looks bad to the rest of the world. And meanwhile, some of these hired mercenaries in Syria have started firing mortars into Lebanon. They just want to get this thing kicked up any way they can. Going to take a break for commercial. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab some phone calls. Art off the grid. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike. You know, I was originally going to call in to talk about the Obama-Cameron news conference today in regards to something he said about Iran, but you brought up Steve Hawking. And I find it interesting, you know, we find all these articles out there talking about Mr. Hawking boycotting Israel. But just today I stumbled across an article on beforeitsnews.com. And you go through this article and you read it. It refers to how in 1973 Mr. Hawking visited the Soviet Union in and amongst all of that garbage was going on there. And then how in 2007 he went to Iran. And they make it sound in this article how they make it sound like he was okay with what was going on in Soviet Russia back in 73 and you know, the persecution of women being, you know, adulteresses being stoned, imprisonment without trial, and so on and so forth. and basically using this as a way to demonize Mr. Hawking, calling him an elitist and a hypocrite, which is something kind of an oxymoron when you're referring to a liberal academic. But then there's this other article, which I found on legalinsurrection.com, where basically they are debunking the whole Hawking boycotting Israel with three very specific statements here. One was from a university spokesman who said that Professor Hawking wouldn't be going because his doctor advised him against flying.
Yeah, but that's already been discredited. Cambridge University had to reverse themselves on that following a statement by Professor Hawking himself.
Right, but what my point here is, it's amazing how these people, and I mean, before it's news.com, I'm very disappointed in them for their article as well, but this is just a pure example of how when you have someone of Mr. Hawking's stature, a man who is greatly respected throughout the entire world on his achievement and what he represents as being the best, one of the best examples of how great humanity can be, how they will go out of their way to demonize someone simply for doing what is right. It's absolutely just...
Well, they don't have any shame. We've known that all along. They have no shame whatsoever. They're just going to try lie after lie after lie until they get one that works. But in this case, they're definitely hoisting with their own petard. The idea that Hawking could go into the former Soviet Union and do something about the situation there from his wheelchair is absurd. In the world of science, people travel around the world attending scientific meetings and conventions. Stephen Hawking is very much in demand around the world, but that doesn't mean he's in a position to do anything about the political structure of the country he's visiting. When I was with NASA, I met a lot of Russian scientists who were pretty cool people. When I was in computer animation, we had Russians coming to visit us at SIGGRAPH from before the fall of the Soviet Union. Didn't mean they approved of our political system. They were there to learn. Got to take a break for station identification. Art, thank you for the call. America, welcome back to the show. And following up on Art's phone call, Israel's standard modus operandi is that anybody who does not toe Israel's line is smeared, their careers destroyed, their lives ruined. It's their automatic response. But I don't think they realize that in going after Stephen Hawking, man who has spent his life in a wheelchair, a man who is basically standing in the same pantheon with Galileo and Sir Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein, in going after him, Israel is making itself look very pathetic. And it's already backfiring on them. That follow-up Huffington Post poll where support for Hawking actually grew despite all the arguments they were putting out there. And all Israel can do now, by continuing to attack this man for standing on a moral principle, they're just going to make it worse for themselves. They're burning out their credibility around the world. I'm going to grab another phone call here. Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I also wanted to talk about Stephen Hawking. And the bottom line is, whether you agree with the man or not, you have to support his right to pretty much believe whatever it is he wishes to believe.
Well, according to Israel, you don't have a right to believe anything they don't tell you. You don't have a right to an opinion that they don't like. And that's exactly what's on display right now.
Well, and whether it's Israel, NBC, global warming, when you advertise on your own network and you only propagate your own information and your own beliefs, you do not strengthen your position. The greatest way to prove your point and prove you're right is to entertain outside ideas and let the facts speak for themselves.
You are exactly right. You are exactly right. If you know factually your position is correct, you welcome debate. You welcome an opposing point of view. Party A gets to stand there screaming about the benefits of chocolate ice cream. Party B gets to stand there and scream about the benefits of pistachio ice cream, and you let the public decide. But when the pistachio guy goes out and tries to get laws passed against those who would criticize pistachio and scream you're being anti-green or anti-nut, you realize they're basically admitting they don't have a factual basis to stand on. And this attack on Stephen Hawking, they're hoisting with their own petard on this one.
Absolutely. And it's like what Caesar, Daste, you protest too much. The more that they deny Stephen Hawking and slander him and smear him, the more tension and the more attention and the more focus they put on his ideas.
That's exactly right.
The best thing they could possibly do is say, we respect Mr. Hawking and his field. We do not agree with his position, but he's welcome to hold it however he sees fit. End of story. I mean, it's idiotic. It's going to backfire on them completely.
It is backfiring, but again, because, you know, back at the height of the Cold War, 1950s and 1960s, these tactics worked in an era of one-way mass communication. They don't work any longer, and they just haven't picked up on that yet, and they are just making themselves look ridiculous. Anything else, Kyle?
No, Michael. Have a good afternoon.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Ultimately, it comes down to that. If you are a democracy, if you are an enlightened society, you understand open debate of every issue is something not only to be tolerated, but encouraged. The more Israel pounds on Stephen Hawking, the more obvious it is they realize their position supporting apartheid is unsupportable. And they're going on the attack, and it's going to backflash on them. There is nothing they can say about Stephen Hawking that is going to diminish his reputation. And remember, I don't even agree with him about the Big Bang, and I still admire the guy. I think he's great. He's an icon of the age. And in going up against him, I think Israel has definitely bitten off more than they can chew. Going to take a break for commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over at the Daily Mail, and you'll probably see this a lot of places, in their comment section, when people make a comment, there's a little up thumb or a down thumb or just some other way for other readers to vote whether they approve of the comment or not. I got an email from somebody who posted the comment, Hawking knows the difference between right and wrong, and he posted that in the Daily Mail, and he got 543 upvotes on that. So if Israel thought that they were going to be able to smear a man of this stature, they have utterly, utterly failed. And like I said, Israel is still playing the game by the rules that worked in the 1950s and 1960s, where they could scream, this person's an anti-Semite, and count on the corporate-owned media to go around, oh yes, it's an anti-Semite, he's just a Jew hater, you don't want to listen to him, and just effectively destroy somebody's career. But those days are gone. I wrote an article about this, the new McCarthyism. And those rules do not work any longer in the era of the independent media. And this furor over Stephen Hawking shows that. Back to the phones here. Robert in Missouri. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hey, I got a couple things, but you just brought up the whole anti-Semite thing. I got called on by a guy that runs a pretty big Christian ministry today just because I pointed out that all he wants to teach about is Islamic terror, and he never wants to talk about Jewish supremacism or any of the dirty Talmudic stuff. And he called me a Jew-hating anti-Semite. And I'm like, well, okay, that's real good for a Christian minister when he wants to ignore half the Bible and teach the other half.
Well, listen to me. There's a story we just put up at whatreallyhappened.com about how the IDF is harassing Christian clergy in the Holy Lands. You might want to copy that off and send it to this guy.
Oh, yeah. Well, I read about these guys in the Orthodox Church and the Catholic priests. They get spit on by the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox, every day they go to work. So, I mean, you know, it's horrible. But I wanted to talk about the whole Benghazi and IRS getting sicked on the enemies of the president.
Yeah.
And, you know, I listen to a lot of these alternative hosts, right? And
yes.
They talk about, oh, this is going to bring this guy down. Well, you know, it's going to bring Obama down. And I'm like, I think a lot of these guys live in gated communities or something, or they're compartmentalized and they live in their little bubble of a talk radio host world, because I live out here on the streets. I'm from St. Louis. And I'll tell you what, let somebody impeach Obama. He could kill somebody on video, and let somebody try to impeach him, and you're going to have uprisings in every major city in this country, which is maybe what they want. Maybe this is the little catalyst that they want to use to throw the DHS goons our way. Because if Obama gets impeached, the level of ignorance out here in the regular old community, these people are going to snap. They're going to flip out, and they're going to think that they're trying to take Obama out because he's a black guy.
Well, I disagree with that. I think at this point, because even the black community is very disillusioned with him right now, I don't think an Obama impeachment would trigger any kind of riots or violence, but I'm in agreement with you on the idea he's not going to be impeached. He is going to finish out his second term in office, barring the unforeseen. What is spinning this out of control is, I am convinced the GOP made a big issue about this to derail Hillary in 2016, and now that it's come out that there was a cover-up, that the White House has been intimidating witnesses, that they have been editing and re-editing the information coming supposedly out of the CIA headed for the Congress, was edited and reviewed and revised by the White House. That says cover-up, and every prostitute out there who dreams of being the next Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, they smell blood in the water, and they're homing in on that right now. So this thing could very easily get out of control. And again, Obama's being hit by the double whammy between Benghazi Gate and now this IRS scandal, and now he's on the record as of this morning saying that he did not know the IRS was doing this before last Friday. The instant he's caught out lying about that, he's whatever's left of his credibility is going to be gone. And again, I don't expect this Congress to have the gonadal tissue to do anything about it, but it will get the ordinary American people taking a much closer look at what's been going on with this government, what's going on, why were they targeting people supporting the Constitution? That's a question that really has no easy cop-out answer. And people are going to be taking a much closer look at the legality of the IRS and the Federal Reserve itself.
Yeah, my thing is, I think the Congress, whether it's Democrat or Republican, is so compromised, and they have so many skeletons in their closet, no matter which party they belong to, that I do not think that any of them really have, like you said, the gonadal tissue to start the articles of impeachment. You had Kucinich that tried it on Bush, and that didn't go anywhere. And then I just don't think any of these people have the guts, or they won't have the support. We saw what happened with the Clinton impeachment, and, I mean, that was real flimsy, but...
that was very, very flimsy.
This guy attacked Libya,
No,
so,
if it goes to articles of impeachment, they have a much stronger case against Obama than they did against Clinton. There is one wild card we need to be aware of, and that, of course, is going to be Israel. Also looking forward to 2016, because if Hillary does get kicked out of the running, then Israel might tell their congressional minions, go ahead and eject Obama. That gives us President Biden, and Biden will be able to run again in 2016. So that may be a wild card that we need to be paying attention to.
Yeah, I think the one thing we really need to watch is whether the masters of Obama, and we know who they are willing to sacrifice him because they think it's expedient or not. So
in a heartbeat, they'll let him go to serve their own ends. There is, at that level of government, there is no loyalty whatsoever. It's, mutual web of blackmail and threats and wet work. And absolutely, if Israel starts to think that Hillary is not going to be able to run in 2016, and the Republicans might actually field a candidate that's less obliging to Israel, they might have Obama impeached and removed from office so that they could get a President Biden in there, and then Biden could run and carry the legacy or the Israel rulership forward.
But with the Republican side, if you don't have some staunch Christian Zionist credentials, you're torched. You're not going to get the nomination. So you got to really, you got to be a real hardcore Christian Zionist on the Republican side with your corporate backing in order to get the Republican nomination. So it's a complicated thing, but
I think the GOP, I mean, if you look at how much attention Rand Paul is getting, and they've already got him up front on this Benghazi situation, I think they're going to run him in 2016, and they're going to try and capitalize on the Ron Paul revolution by saying, well, we didn't give you Ron Paul, but here's his son. It's Ron Paul Light. We know that that's a complete lie, but I really do think they're considering running him in 2016.
Yeah, I do too, and he's already made his little pilgrimage, put on the yarmulke, went to the Western Wall and everything else, so... All right, see you, Mike.
All right, and we're going to switch over to Larry in Oregon. Aloha, Larry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I saw a movie last night called Chino with Charles Bronson. Have you ever seen that?
Nope, can't say I have.
Okay, well, they had a baby horse that would be called a foal.
Yes.
And its mother died, and then it was brought back, and it was hand-fed with milk. And then later in the movie, you heard this horse crying or whinnying, and then you went outside, and they showed you the body of this horse. And then you heard the voice that said, and we're going to get you in other ways, too. Now, why I'm bringing up this story is because this is exactly how these movie people did, is exactly how they create and use the Holocaust weapon. Mm-hmm. Because this little horse, little baby horse, was cute and cuddly. It was innocent, and it was helpless. And so this is the picture. They go through this almost the same process they went through in this movie where they show the mother was killed, and then they have this baby horse. It's almost the same mind control, creating a mind control weapon.
It's just basically saying you will feel sorry for this protagonist and you will hate the antagonist, and that's just classic drama and storytelling, and I don't think necessarily that there's a really tangible link between this movie and the Holocaust. It is just the general rules of propagandistic storytelling. So, Larry, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are loading up, and we're going to switch over to Art in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike, for taking my call. You commented earlier on the Huffington Post and also the ADL. When you I did some research, put it on a website, noplaceforcorruption.com. You will find out that the Huffington Post was taken over by American Online, which is the primary ownership goes back to the Brosmans. You also find
that explains that.
You will also find that the Anti-Defamation League is basically run by the Brosmans. And you also find that DuPont in Delaware is controlled by the Brosmans, and DuPont controls the politics of Delaware, hence they control none other than Joe Biden. They all are directly connected. It is not an indirect connection. It is a direct connection.
Well, you see, this is the reason that Putin has started instituting laws in Russia that their politicians cannot have financial entanglements outside the country. It's why Putin got rid of their money junkies when he came to power and kicked them all out. And Russia's doing really great right now compared to the United States of America. We have, unfortunately, a segment of the population in this country who are very predatory, who are absolutely convinced that they are supposed to be rich and everybody else is supposed to be poor, and anything that brings them wealth is blessed by their imaginary playmate in the sky. And this is, a belief all across money junkies everywhere. So it's a reality, and somebody's going to have to deal with it when we talk about the blueprint for the new America. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Art. We'll be right back. America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. I just wanted to call and chime in on one thing, talking about impeachment of Obama, and I'd like to make 2 points. The first of which is, I think I may have mentioned before, my wife is black. She's a college-educated policy wonk, and all logic flies out the window when talking about Obama. So I think that caller was I think closer to right on that. However, I want to make the point that back when we impeached Clinton, and it was clear he had perjured himself under oath.
Yes.
And the Republicans had control of both the Senate and the House at the time. And yet, Clinton was able to get free when it was clear to everybody that he had perjured himself. The lesson to be learned, and was learned by George Bush, who had when he started out, of both the Republican House and Senate, and later just one of the houses was his, but was that if Clinton could get away with an antagonistic Senate and House, then he could do anything and get away with it, and he has. And Obama is carrying that on, with a Democratic Senate as well. Plus, Obama has the enormous advantage of, if ever anything should ever come to an impeachment trial, or even putting the issue of impeachment forth to be voted on, he can go and target every loved one, break into any house that he wants, and just browbeat these guys back with all the surveillance state Gestapo apparatus that is now in full effect. So it would be very dirty, and or he could just declare a state of emergency, for Christ's sake. But at any rate,
I think would provoke an uprising among the American people. I think that's why they're trying to figure out some way to get the guns without declaring a national emergency, but they may feel very much they're in a corner right now on that regard.
Well, Michael, that I think you're right about that, because that would even get me to get the hair up on the back of my neck. But I will tell you that anybody who puts forth any sort of articles of impeachment or anything is going to have the full weight of the Gestapo down on them. All their recorded phone conversations and emails and all the illegal break-ins that they can do and everything. So that's completely off the table. Impeachment's never going to happen again.
Well, I agree with you on that one up to the point, because it is true Obama and Israel have a pretty much lock on the United States Congress, to a lesser extent the judiciary, and they thought they had a lock on the corporate media. But like I said, the GOP has kicked over a major anthill, because what started out as simply an attempt to smear Hillary Clinton ahead of the 2016 elections, now it's gotten into cover-up, and now we have this IRS scandal, which has already put Obama into Richard Nixon territory. And you've got the entire corporate media that are desperate to regain the trust of the American people, desperate to be the next Woodward and Bernstein. They're smelling blood in the water. It may not be possible for the government to control them. They can control one or two. Trying to control all of them in all 50 states, that's not going to happen.
Michael, with the Benghazi thing, I mean, he's also, his maneuver room is severely restricted, Obama's, because they were there. Of course, that Benghazi facility existed to recruit and arm Al Qaeda, to send over to Syria. That's what it existed for. So there are laws against that, obviously. Also, there's a dedicated statute saying that no State Department facility can be used for detention. They were detaining people there. There's a whole lot of laws broken here, and his room for maneuver is severely limited on this. Mm-hmm. So we'll see what's happening on that. But that's all I got, and thanks very much, Michael.
All right, you got it. All righty. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Getting back over to the Middle East, as you're probably already aware, Israel is already trying to ramp up the idea that we must go kill the Iranians for them. Israel is talking about a unilateral strike into Iran along the lines of what they just did in Syria, and they're talking about bombing Iran's power station, its fuel rod processing plants, and its medical isotope factories and anything else with which Iran is making nuclear products to which they are legally entitled under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But analysts are looking at the weather patterns over that area, and they're basically saying if Israel bombs Iran's nuclear facilities, it is going to contaminate the entire Gulf States region. Now, Israel doesn't care. Let's shower radiation all over Dubai and all the rest of those, Saudi Arabia and the rest of that stuff, and let them all die of cancers, But that's really what they're risking here, because you need to understand, during spring, summer, right? We're coming into that time of year. You get these powerful winds all over the region that create these huge sandstorms. And if you're blowing the sand around, you're blowing around the radioactive debris as well. It would be worse than Chernobyl and Fukushima put together. It's an operating nuclear power station that they're talking about bombing, and that's how incredibly reckless Israel is. They don't care what happens to anybody else as long as Israel gets what Israel wants. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and let's see. We already talked to Peter in Los Angeles, so the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Now, an interesting article just showed up at Wired.com, and the headline is, U.S. Kicks Drug War Habit Makes Peace with Afghan Poppies. And the story is going on about these soldiers in Afghanistan who have all these rules they are supposed to follow regarding treatment of the opium poppy fields. They're not allowed to set foot in the poppy fields. They're not allowed to destroy the fields. They're not allowed to even send in the local Afghanis to burn, plow under, or poison the opium poppies. And Wired is acting like this is a big, brand new, shocking story. It isn't. We have been showing you this for years. Prior to the invasion, Afghanistan, the Taliban, under Taliban rule, opium production had been shut down completely. As soon as the U.S. invaded, the poppies were blooming all over the place. There were bumper crops, and the opium is flooding into the United States of America and into Russia. They're not very happy about that. And this is pretty much well known all over the independent media, and now the corporate media, in the person of Wired, is finally starting to report this story and act like it's a big breaking story. They just now found this. I don't think so. I don't think so at all. All righty, we're going to grab a phone call here. Cindy in Oregon. Aloha, Cindy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I was just joined a little while ago, and I'm terribly sorry if I missed something that was significant. But one thing that is being overlooked is that the primary problem that's really going on here is that in 1994 and in 97, they did the Human Genome Project, which was where they took the DNA and did the DNA sequencing, and then they patented the whole human genome.
Yes.
That patent is what backs world currency today.
I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time with that one. Why would a patent on the human genome be a backing to currency? I mean, I understand in the United States the Federal Reserve note is backed by future tax revenues of the American slaves, but that's got nothing to do with the DNA.
It does. It has everything to do with it.
Well, I'd like to see some provenance about that. I'm really having a hard time buying into that one. So thanks a lot, Cindy. We're going to let you go. And getting back to Europe, over in Spain, the protests are continuing. They've had major protests. The people of Spain are literally calling for their entire government to step down. In fact, the new motto of this thing is from outrage to rebellion. And they're talking about more protests scheduled in Madrid, in Barcelona. We have an article up there listing all the places these protests are going to be taking place. It's all across the country. People are very unhappy with what's going on under these private central banks that impoverish the people to make themselves rich. Over in Greece, they've had to take emergency action to ward off a strike by teachers, who are very upset over the fact that their budgets and their paychecks are being cut to make the bankers happy. And so this, we're getting into an era of forced labor. We don't care if this job doesn't pay enough for you to live on. This is what you will do, and we'll give you what we think the job is worth, and you don't have any choice about this. Now, as I mentioned earlier today, David Cameron and Barack Obama had a joint press conference. Cameron is there in Washington, D.C., talking about trade and basically going on about what they're calling this new tax and trade agenda. They want to open up trade between the United States and Great Britain. Well, trade between Great Britain and the United States is already pretty open. Okay? And, they're basically saying, in fact, Cameron's statement was he tried to equate it to a cake. Trade makes the cake bigger so everyone can benefit. And no, that is absolutely not true. This only works if you have something to trade. But our agriculture has been curtailed by ethanol diversion. Nobody wants our GMO products. In fact, Peru just outlawed GMO. Our manufacturing is in decline. And so we don't really have anything to trade. The U.S. business model for decades has been to do the manufacturing in other countries around the globe where labor is cheap. Then they import the products and resell them to a captive market at a profit. But other nations aren't going to buy the U.S. more expensive version of the exact same product. They can directly import themselves from those manufacturing centers. And so basically what the Obama and Cameron plan is protectionism, to use import restrictions and taxes to force the British and Americans to buy products from each other that neither one really wants. That's what they're talking about here. The United States business model is we don't make or grow anything anymore. We just act as the middleman. We're going to buy and import from other places. You're not allowed to go buy your stuff there, so we will do it for you and sell it to you at a higher markup. That's basically it. We're not a nation of innovators and builders and growers any longer. We're a nation of middlemen who politic themselves into the middle of that chain from producer to consumer, and then so organize the laws that you're not allowed to bypass them any longer. And that's really what it's all about. Over at moneynews.com, they're going on about market optimists see more gains for Wall Street. And I'm not surprised, because the Federal Reserve is still pouring all this instantly created money onto Wall Street. And as long as they're getting all this free money, or almost free money, falling from heaven, good times are going to roll on the stock market. Except, of course, all this instantly created money is deteriorating the value of the money you've already worked for, you've already earned, you've put in your pocket, put in your savings account. And ultimately, when you adjust the stock market for the inflation being caused by all this newly created cash, the market is still losing real value, regardless of what those skyrocketing numbers may look like. And the whole point of those skyrocketing numbers is that's the little banner they're going to wave at you to say, see, the economy is doing great, Wall Street is doing wonderfully, and if you're hungry and homeless and jobless, really, somehow it's all your own fault. But as we pointed out many times before, when you have a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, debt piles up faster than available money, and it drives everybody to be predatory, to get those little pieces of ink and paper. And that's why you see companies willing to sell products that really aren't very good. They cut the corners, software that's released with thousands of bugs still in it, products that fall apart just as soon as the warranty is over, pharmaceuticals that cause more harm than good. All of this becomes accepted business behavior in order to grab their share of what little currency remains in circulation. For the few to be very rich, the vast majority must be poor. And that, too, is intentional, because when you're talking about your truly classic money junkie, it doesn't matter how much they have. They don't feel rich unless they can look out their window and see everybody else around them poor. And that is really a degree of the pathology that we're dealing with in these people. Now, getting back to dealing with debt and dealing with foreclosure, this is a very interesting story, and this is coming out of the Denver Post. Apparently, there was a foreclosure process going through the court system. And this was a lady named Lisa K. Brumfield. She had a mortgage, and the bank foreclosed on her. And she went to the judge and say, do these people foreclosing on me have the original documents? Remember, we've talked about whether or not foreclosing entities have the note, the title, the promissory note. They've got to have all of that to foreclose, to prove they have standing to foreclose. And the lawyers for the bank kept saying, oh, we've got the documents, we've got the documents, we've got the documents. And finally the judge said, look, you've got to show them to me. District Judge William Martinez said to the lawyers, you must produce these documents in my court, and the bank canceled the whole lawsuit, walked away. 2-year legal proceeding, and it was all a bluff. The bank didn't really have grounds to foreclose. So why is this going on? Why are they foreclosing? It's very simple. Following the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud, the major banks are trying to stay solvent. They need black ink at the bottom of their balance sheet. That little monthly payment you're making isn't enough to keep them out of trouble. They need the entire value of your house on their balance sheet right now, today, and that was the motive behind this firestorm of foreclosures all across the country and all the criminality associated with it. Phony notaries, document forgery. Homes were being foreclosed on that didn't even have mortgages. They were just grabbing all the houses they could. It's wealth confiscation to protect the banks, no different than when Roosevelt confiscated all the gold back in 1933. And that's why Obama came out with this foreclosure fraud settlement that told the state's attorney generals, do not prosecute for criminality. We, the federal government, will take care of it. And it wound up basically being an indemnification of all the illegal activity, a wrist slap fine, and ultimately the people whose homes were provably taken from them from fraud got a check for a grand total of about $300. There's a fair price for all the equity in their homes. And in some cases, those checks actually bounced. It is a massive, massive fraud committed by the financial centers and the government against you. And they're doing it in a way to try and trick you into thinking it's your own fault. And it isn't. You're the victims. You did not do anything wrong to be in this circumstance. It was done to you. Over and over and over again. Now, a little embarrassing story over the weekend. Apparently, the FBI went after this Saudi student who was seen with, insert drum roll here, a pressure cooker. And they went in and they gave him a good grilling. Turned out he was cooking. He was using a pressure cooker for what you're supposed to use it for, cooking. And the FBI's out there saying, oh, you've got a pressure cooker and you're Saudi. You must be up to something no good. Apparently, he was making kabsa, which is this Saudi Arabian rice dish that requires a pressure cooker. They're out there still trying to find something to wave at you that's, ooh, bad Arabs and the rest of it. Now, I want to talk about global warming, human-caused global warming. And NASA got busted for this lame animation they came out with the other day, where they were showing a 30-year animation of Landsat photos showing this area where there was a glacier getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But if you look very carefully at the shadows on the mountains, what they did is when they started the animation 30 years ago, they were using the winter month images. And then as they moved forward into the present day, they started going to later and later months until the last images are from summer, when ice and snow is in fact greatly reduced. That's the degree of the sham out there. They're still trying to sell this global warming nonsense. Meanwhile, if you live up in Minnesota on the shore of the Great Lake, you probably had a very unpleasant weekend because apparently this huge sheet of ice, they were calling it the glaciers on speed, literally came on shore and wiped out homes on the shoreline in Minnesota. Ice, giant ice. This is May 13th. Summer is only weeks away, and the ice is eating homes in Minnesota. And they're still out there trying to say, oh, human-caused global warming, and, CO2 levels are rising alarmingly, and you know what's really funny? All of these articles where they say CO2 levels are rising alarmingly, and they all come down to the Atmospheric Observatory here in Hawaii, which is located down on the Big Island on a peak called Mauna Kea. That's where everybody gets their atmospheric CO2 measurements from. There's only one small problem. Mauna Kea is the top of an active volcano. This Mauna Kea Observatory is just upslope from the Kilauea crater and all the vents from the eruption that has been going on since 1983. What do volcanoes emit for gases? Carbon dioxide. In fact, carbon dioxide is the majority constituent of volcanic emissions, second only to water vapor. So if you're on the top of an active volcano taking measurements of carbon dioxide, whatever numbers you're getting are irrelevant to the rest of the planet, and yet this is being waved around to prove carbon dioxide is going up, and you are to blame, and we need carbon taxes. The lies are shameless. We've had all these record-setting winters. 10 years ago, they were saying snow was going to be a thing of the past, and now we have homes in Minnesota being eaten by ice in May, mid-May. There was snow on Mother's Day. So now the new spin is global warming has paused. It's still there. We know it's happening, and it's your fault. It's just temporarily paused, and we're not exactly sure why. Actually, global temperatures have cooled. Sunspot activity is way below the expected normal. We may be going into a new Maunder minimum, which means a new little ice age. The Russians have come out saying that they're pretty certain they have uncovered evidence of a much longer period solar cycle than was previously known. We know about the 11 and 22-year sunspot cycles, but we've only been able to really scientifically study the sun for about 100 years. If there are cycles in solar output longer than that, we haven't been studying the sun long enough to detect those. Now the Russians are saying they think there is a 200-year cycle in solar output, which would time it back nicely with the last Maunder minimum. They're still out there selling this agenda. And if that doesn't get you worried, they're waving around these two new diseases, and they're talking global outbreak, pandemic, it's going to be horrible, people are going to be dying. And they're talking about this new coronavirus that's emerged in the Middle East, and a new bird flu spreading in China. And they're out there sounding the warning, this is going to be the next great flu pandemic. You remember back in 2009, the when pigs fly flu? And they declared that one a pandemic by fudging the numbers down. And it turned out to be nothing. It actually killed fewer people than the regular seasonal flu. This is all about a commercial to get you to rush right out and buy the latest vaccines. Buy them all. Get the complete set. Buy 2 of each. They're small. And it's a reminder, we will never have a healthy society, a healthy population, so long as disease is viewed as a profit opportunity. And that's really what it is. There's a new disease coming and you've got to buy our Dr. Wisdom's snake oil. It's operating on the same moral level as the traveling Wild West medicine show. There's a disease out there that's coming to get you. You got to buy this bottle of what's it and drink it and you will be immune. Meanwhile, interesting story coming out of the rebel.org, and it's actually from a couple of other sources as well. Using a Freedom of Information Act in Great Britain, filed by a doctor, he got the documents for the last 30 years proving that the government has known most vaccines don't actually work, known that in many cases they will trigger the diseases they're supposed to prevent, known they are hazardous to children. We all know about that one vaccine that's just triggered an epidemic of narcolepsy in children. Provably, the government lied to the public about the safety and efficacy of the vaccines and blocked safety studies. And these are the same vaccines the U.S. government demands you put in your children. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're just getting a breaking story. Apparently, the pipeline that takes oil from Iraq into Turkey has been damaged with multiple explosions, section of the pipeline, so Turkey is at least temporarily cut off from that oil supply. Will they blame it on Syria? Probably. Probably. All righty, let's see. Now, getting back to the health and science issues, and again, you have to confront the realization that our entire culture has become corrupted by that necessity to get these little pieces of ink and paper to deal with the skyrocketing debt. The economy is not in balance. It is deliberately out of balance to take the real wealth of the nation and put it in the pockets of the money junkies. And over time, this strangulation by debt destroys the best of our human nature. We stop thinking about altruistic concerns. Am I putting out a product that is really going to be good for my customers? Am I making sure this product won't harm people? Is it a quality product I can take pride in? All of those considerations have pretty much evaporated in the American culture. We have, in a very real sense, become very decadent. Just get the next whiz-bang out there. Get the money and then, head on off to the Caymans here. So there's this story over in collectiveevolution.com where research is showing that the Bt toxins found in Monsanto genetically modified crops damage red blood cells in mammals. And I presume pretty much everybody listening to this show is a mammal, so you ought to be concerned. Now, this Bt toxin is used as a biological pesticide. The Monsanto crops literally created inside the crop. You can't wash it off. It's inside the structure of the food. Monsanto's claim was that Bt is toxic only to insects. Recent studies are showing, no, it affects other than insects. There's another new study that is linking GMO food to leukemia. And these articles are linked to whatreallyhappened.com, so you can go look at them, and you need to. Now, Peru has banned GMOs. Don't want them. They're absolutely banned. More and more countries are saying we can't have these. It is the most dangerous technology that man has ever worked with. And it's being played with in an almost completely reckless disregard for its potential consequences. And the model is basically, we're going to tinker with this gene and we get the desired result. We're not even going to look for any other side effects. and we'll put it out there. Remember the huge scandal over the Roundup Ready corn and the Roundup pesticide. The study in France kept rats alive for the entire rat's lifespan and discovered after the 4th month they started getting sick, huge tumors. Monsanto said, that's nonsense. We tested the stuff for 3 months and it's perfectly safe. And because of Monsanto's political power, French studies ignored. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as you're probably already aware, the so-called abortion doctor Kermit Gosnell was found guilty of first-degree murder in the case of 3 late-term babies and involuntary manslaughter in the case of one of the mothers who died of a drug overdose. So that story has just come down. We were talking before about money junkies just not really caring about what's going on around them. And there's this story just came in. Apparently down in Belize, a construction company needed rock for a road building project they'd been contracted to do. And they basically went in with backhoes and bulldozers and they knocked down a Mayan pyramid. 2,300-year-old archaeological treasure, and just carted off the rock to build a road. The Mayan pyramid was on private land to which the construction company did not have access, and in any event, Belize, like pretty much every other country on earth, the government protects all archaeological treasures. And this construction company said, we need rock, we can't afford to buy. There's a big pile of rock, we'll just take that. The economy is out of balance, and society with it. Absolutely. All righty, let's see, moving right along. Supposedly this week, the House is going to try again to vote to repeal Obamacare. It is running into a major brick wall. With all the fury over IRS Gate and Benghazi Gate, Obama is not going to have a lot of influence left over to play politics with Congress for Obamacare. One of the things that is snuck in there apparently is that when you file your income tax returns, you have to include your personal health information to the Internal Revenue Service, who, to the best of my knowledge, are not actually doctors. But they have been given the authority to demand not only where you're working and how much you're making and what you're buying and spending your money on, but your health condition as well in order to determine your compliance with Obamacare. And there are a lot of people who probably don't want all of their medical facts and history made known to any government agency, especially one with a reputation for playing fast and loose with the data they collect. The IRS has been scandalized time and time again by releasing ordinary citizens' tax information without a warrant to people who request it. There was a big scandal. In fact, every election we get, there's always a scandal that some candidates' tax records have somehow been made public. Now then, do you remember many times I've told you that governments really can't solve real-world problems, like the coming ice age, the Gulf oil disaster, Fukushima, but they're really good at solving problems they themselves come up with? Well, apparently, over in Swaziland, they have just passed a law making it a crime for a witch to fly a broomstick above 150 meters. If you are a witch in Swaziland, you've got to keep your broom below 150 meters so that you're not interfering with civil air transportation. So we're all going to have to cough up some bail money for Harry Potter at this point. All righty, let's see, over in the phones, George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
Doing good.
Well, I attended a law school lecture last weekend, and one of the very interesting thing a retired judge sat there and said about, he goes, when we take back this country, he says we should insert a constitutional amendment into the Constitution requiring judges be reconfirmed every 3 years on the bench, who sit on the bench. For the reason is there's too much conflict of interest, and you mentioned Monsanto, that Monsanto's got the judges paid off, and I think there should be accountability.
George, can you stay with me? I want to bring you back after the commercials, because there's also that very horrible Supreme Court decision that just got handed down regarding their intellectual property on their crops. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Monsanto. We're talking about this apparent attempt to monopolize control of the world's agriculture. We're talking about all these known issues with their genetically modified crops, all these countries that are starting to ban GMO because of all the problems that are surfacing, and yet here in the United States of America, the U.S. government, the finest government money can buy, is saying, oh yeah, these are harmless, and you don't even have a right to know if you're eating these altered DNA products. And as I was telling George before we went to the commercial break, apparently the Supreme Court has ruled in favor of Monsanto in the case of Vernon Hugh Bowman, who had bought the Monsanto seeds, signed the contract saying he's not allowed to save his seeds from one year to the next. He apparently bought some seeds that were supposed to be used for animal feed, which is where the surplus seeds go, planted those, and some of those had the Monsanto gene. Monsanto sued, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And basically the Supreme Court, while limiting the scope of their decision, saying it doesn't apply to all self-replicating products, basically said that even if you get the Monsanto gene entirely by accident, by cross-pollination, once it's on your farm fields, you must pay Monsanto blah, blah, blah kind of money. My question would be I'd like to see this judge's investment portfolio. And I think when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, that judges ought to also have their wealth in a blind trust during their time in office in order to avoid these kinds of conflicts of interest. And we know there's all kinds of conflict of interest. It's like going into a court in a tax law case and, not bothering to remember that judge's salary, his robes, his courtroom, and all of his staff are paid for out of tax revenues. That's a conflict of interest. But we're not supposed to notice it. George, anything else?
Well, I'm just saying, that'd be one thing, a blind trust, and have them reconfirmed every justice every 3 years, and this time not just the Senate, but they have to go through a confirmation process in the House of Representatives, and if the House does not recommend for reconfirmation because a judge outside the Constitution, they don't get reconfirmed in the Senate.
I don't know. I would almost entertain the idea, since we're talking about direct participatory democracy as the new model for the new America, I would say judges should be elected. They should have to go out to the public and say, this is my record of decisions in the lower court, and just be subject to an election in order to take away that corrupting influence of the appointing official and the confirming Congress. So the judges are sitting on the bench saying, I don't owe anything to the president. I don't owe anything to the state senator. I don't owe anything to the legislature. I was put here by the people to take care of the people's business.
Exactly. I mean, because the way the judges are is more like, they can make any flip-flop decision, not even go by the Constitution, and nothing happens to them. And it's like, you look at Justice Kagan. Personally, I think she should be impeached because when the Supreme Court case for Obamacare came up, she is supposed to recuse herself. And
yes.
She never did.
That's right.
And I even told, the state legislature, when they were repealing Obamacare, they should put that little appendix in there that Justice Kagan should have recused herself and her vote should not count on the court. There should be a split decision, 4-4.
Okay. I'm in agreement with you on that. And again, the entire system is corrupted, top to bottom. There's really no other way around that. George, going to let you go here. We got another caller on the line, Dave in Iowa. Aloha, Dave. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I got a small bone to pick with you, although it's a small one. I agree with the sentiment of your statement, but actuality, judges, at least federal court judges, have their uniforms provided by themselves. It has to do with them being private parties and their uniforms being private. And
yeah, but they get a tax deduction for it.
They have to look up the term Bear Street, and I would suggest they use a Black Law dictionary.
Okay, but the overall point is simply this. When you go into a court, you're dealing with people whose entire livelihood is derived from tax revenues by hook or by crook, by whatever circuitous route. And, when you talk to people like Joe Bannister, they'll tell you, look, yes, the law is on the side of the people, but don't expect any justice from an American court of law because they are all hamstrung by the fact they're dependent on tax revenues to operate. And I think a classic case example of that is Sullivan versus United States, in which the judge, James C. Fox, admits in the court record the 16th Amendment failed ratification. Then he goes on to explain why they're going to go on acting like it's true on the basis of, hey, we got away with it this long, so, by default and de facto, it's now part of the Constitution, which is an authority the Constitution does not grant to judges. So here you have a judge who's admitting the 16th Amendment wasn't ratified, then he's rationalizing why they're going to go on continuing to use it, in order to extract tax revenues from the American people.
Hey, the law has never stood in the way of judges grabbing more power. Marbury versus Madison, they just invented a new power. Everyone agreed with them and said it was a great idea, but let's be straight about this. The judges are the ones who determine what the law says, not the legislatures.
Well, the judges are supposed to interpret the law, but they may not rewrite it from the bench, but a lot of them, unfortunately, sadly do. If you go back and you look at Aaron Russo's documentary, America, Freedom to Fascism, you have that one case where this woman is talking about this tax case that went to court, and they were not allowed to bring the actual law in before the jury. The judge refused to let it in, and then this judge told the jury, I will tell you what the law is, and then proceeded to basically give them a lot of completely unsupported nonsense. And so it's a very inappropriate way for a judge to act. But again, he's ruling on the basis of his own continued paycheck and perks and the very nice building that he gets to go to work in every day.
Yeah, and you have to realize the fact that most judges, there are some courts like special courts like family courts and stuff, but most judges are acting in a private capacity at the same time that they're acting as an adjudicator or whatever.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Absolutely right. All right, Dave, we're going to let you go here. Thank you very much. We're getting on to the end of the show. Phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Speaking of taxes, kind of an interesting story came up last week. Apparently, people living in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas have been paying an added fee on their electric bill every month since 2008. This was supposed to be a federally mandated utility tax levied on the customers by the power company. And apparently the power company was collecting this extra money, but never turned it over to the federal government. Something like $500 million in money just taken from the consumers under the guise of a federal tax that this power company just put in their own pocket. Now, people are still getting very upset over this huge push for the increased surveillance state, how the FBI can legally read your emails without a warrant. And it's a complete violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. And the judges are out there trying to say, well, when they wrote the Fourth Amendment, there was no such thing as email, so we're going to say that paper letters are still protected, but all this new technology, the Founding Fathers had no idea about that. But if you look carefully at the Fourth Amendment, it doesn't specifically say this relates to mail or to semaphore or smoke signals or any of the communications technologies that existed at the time. And don't forget, the Fourth Amendment has been ruled by the Supreme Court to apply to telephones, which didn't exist when the Constitution was being written, and the telegraph, which wasn't in existence when the Constitution was written. So this is just a case of trying to convince you to surrender your constitutional rights by lying to you that they don't apply to the modern world. Of course they do. The only way they can stop applying to the modern world is for the Congress to pass an amendment to the Constitution, which must be ratified by 3/4 of the states. And they're not having a lot of luck with that one here. Apparently there's been another case where the FBI was using what is called a stingray fake cell tower. In other words, as you know, when you have a smartphone or a cell phone, you talk to it, and the cell tower nearest to you takes the signal, puts it onto the landlines, and routes it through to wherever it needs to go. The FBI has a gizmo they call the stingray, that they will basically park next to someone they want to keep an eye on, and it becomes, by default, the closest cell tower to the phone. So your phone connects to the stingray then connects to the regular telephone system. But because it's owned by the FBI, it executes what's called a man-in-the-middle attack on your private communications. And apparently in this case, a federal judge said, yeah, it's legal for the FBI to collect information that way by putting up a bogus cell phone tower and using it to intercept your private communications. That's now considered legal for the FBI to do. And again, it is a Fourth Amendment violation. And the government's excuse is, well, even though landline, telephones have a right to privacy, we have just arbitrarily decided that cell phones do not because you're broadcasting on an open carrier wave. Forgetting, of course, that cell phones are encrypted. It's a very intentionally weak encryption to allow the government to break into it. But it's just, again, it's all this listening. My wife and I were watching V for Vendetta again last night, and I remember looking at that scene where these vans are just prowling the streets in the neighborhood, listening into all the phone calls and all the conversations in the room. We're there. We're there. Up in Maine, they've got a bill to allow the police to use drones to basically peek in through your windows without a search warrant, headed to the Maine Senate. Hopefully, with any luck, the Maine police will drive their drone into their SWAT team like happened down in Texas. Got to take a break for commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And there's a little bit of good news from all this surveillance going on around us. Unfortunately, it's not in this country. It's down in Australia. They had a privacy awareness week during which a gentleman by the name of Adam Bonner won a landmark decision against closed-circuit TV cameras in New South Wales, which includes the city of Sydney, obviously. And this was focused on the town of Nowra, but it set a legal precedent where these cameras do, in fact, represent an invasion of privacy of people who are just walking around trying to live their lives. They're not exactly sure what the remedy is going to be, but in the meantime, the town has simply switched off all their closed-circuit TV cameras while they try and figure out what the legal ramifications are. So at least down in Australia, they understand that the government does not have an automatic right to keep you under constant video surveillance just for the heck of it. And again, because of the Fourth Amendment, the same thing applies here. Now, obviously, if you're out in public, you don't really have a right to privacy. And that applies to the police and to politicians as well as to the ordinary American people. But too many of these cameras are peeking in through windows into private property. And may not even be intentional. If you have a camera up there on the street light looking down the street, some of the windows are going to be open and the camera is seeing inside there. Now, going the other direction, the Boston Police Commissioner, trying to maximize this whole Boston bombing for political and propaganda gain, is calling for even more cameras than they have now. And they got a lot of cameras in Boston. Not as many as they have in Great Britain, but they got a lot of cameras in Boston. And he's out there saying, we got to have these cameras so we can show the juries what's going on. And he's basically admitting the cameras don't deter crime. And they certainly did not help prevent the Boston bombing. They just want a record of everybody doing everything that they can go back and refer to anytime they're trying to make a case against you. And by the way, contrary to what the Boston Police Commissioner says, images from cameras can lie. The U.S. government has been lying using doctored and altered images going way, way, way back. Remember the famous picture of Lee Harvey Oswald in his backyard with the newspaper and the rifle that was exposed as a fake? We've seen that happen time and time again. Images from cameras do lie, and the technology to make them lie is even better today than it was back in 1963. Realize we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of that assassination later this year, and we're already seeing all of this noise being put out there. Oh, LBJ did it, and blah, blah, blah. They're trying to muddy the waters to keep the inevitable interest in the John F. Kennedy assassination from coming back and focusing in on exactly what did happen. But you know something? We don't need to argue about the fine details back and forth. We all agree that the government and the corporate media lied to us all about what happened at Dealey Plaza, and that's all we really need to understand before deciding what are we going to do about it. What are we going to do about a government that lies to us about everything? Because I've been through that Constitution many times, and nowhere in there does it say the government is authorized legally to lie to the American people. It's just not in there. And so as a founding principle of the next America, a government that lies to the people is acting illegally and unconstitutionally and delegitimizes itself by that very lie. I will have a truthful government, or I will have no government at all. Let's see, somebody got a tape recording coming out of the New Jersey legislature, where after the meeting was formally closed and they thought they had some privacy, they were talking about, oh, we got to get a bill to confiscate the guns. They're openly talking about gun confiscation. They are afraid of you. They know that you know how you have been robbed blind by private central banking and a complicit government. They don't want to do the responsible, manly, honorable thing and resign. No, no, no. They want to keep the party going. And that means they need to come up some way to convince you to give up your guns and rely on the police to protect you, even though provably the police cannot. Police did not stop the Boston bombing. Police did not stop that shooting in New Orleans, even though they were standing right there. Now, moving right along. We have been talking about the Joint Strike Fighter, the F-35, which still does not work fully. They can't get that helmet-based weapons fire control system to operate. Can't fly in the rain, can't fly in the fog, can't get too close to a thunderstorm or the electronics quit working. The naval variant for the U.S. can't land on a carrier because the arrestor hook is too close to the main landing gear. Main landing gear slaps that wire down and the hook misses it. Now, the Royal Navy is building 2 new aircraft carriers. They're smaller than the American carriers because their focus is on aircraft that can take off and land vertically. When we come back from these commercials, I will tell you why the British are all of a sudden very unhappy over the Joint Strike Fighter. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about the Joint Strike Fighter, the F-35. Britain is buying them to deploy on their new aircraft carriers, which are designed around the model of vertically landing aircraft, like the Harrier. And they're just now discovering that because of design flaws in the power plant of the Joint Strike Fighter, they don't have the power to land vertically if the weather is too hot, because remember, as the temperature goes up, the air gets less dense. And if there's a low-pressure system overhead, the same thing. There isn't enough air for this thing to grab onto to land on the carriers unless it jettisons all of its extraneous equipment, like the weapons racks and everything have to get dumped in the ocean to get it back on board. And it's another reminder that although the United States of America is spending record amounts of money on these very exotic weapon systems, they're really not very good. You're not getting a lot of bang for your buck. And so trying to predict the outcome of a future war based solely on the volume of money shoveled into the war machine is problematic, because other nations that are spending less money but spending it wisely are going to come up with better weapon systems. At the very least, because they're less expensive, they can build more of them. And so now Britain's having problems with this whole situation. No wonder Cameron and Obama are there talking about enforcing trade between Great Britain and the United States. Nobody else is going to want any of this junk. All right, a couple of breaking stories I wanted to break in. Over at White House Dossier, this is being reported by Keith Koffler. Apparently last Friday, the White House held a secret meeting with the corporate media regarding Benghazi. Wasn't supposed to get out there, but apparently the top 14 news outlets in the United States were invited to send representatives to the White House for an off-the-record briefing about Benghazi. Nothing said in the meeting can go on the record. What the White House is trying to do is take control of the corporate media's portrayal of what happened at Benghazi. They're trying to basically send the corporate media in a certain direction and away from what may have really gone down there. And again, the idea that the CIA was told to stand down when they heard the shooting, the special forces were getting ready to go from Tripoli to Benghazi, were told to stand down, supports my theory that Benghazi was supposed to be a staged, managed publicity stunt for the Obama re-election campaign, and it got out of control when the neighboring Libyans heard the gunfire, decided to join on in, and it just became a riot and the ambassador was killed. That's what I think happened. Because remember, After Benghazi happened, there were spontaneous riots all across the Middle East. The people are just ready to go at the first sound of any kind of problem. It's like the old Minutemen. Don't wait for orders. Just ride toward the sounds of gunfire. And that appears to be what they did in Benghazi. And so now the White House has brought in these 14 media outlets and had a private little meeting. You get to come into the White House, here, steal an ashtray for your desk or something like that, in order to write the story for them that you're going to be seeing in the corporate media. Maybe. I think they're trying to get ahead of the ball. But like I said, now that we've got evidence of a cover-up, and this secret meeting is just more of the same, everybody in the corporate media who dreams of being the next Woodward and Bernstein, they smell blood in the water, and they're going to be moving in for the kill. Now, let's see. Over in Israel, Gilad Sharon, the son of the former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, is out there writing an op-ed saying, we need to flatten entire neighborhoods in Gaza. Now, can you imagine what the reaction of the world, or at least the American corporate media, would be if somebody in Palestine went on the record saying we have to flatten entire neighborhoods in Israel? What would be the reaction? There'd be a hue and cry, those gosh darn Palestinians, they're talking about flattening Israel. And yet Gilad Sharon can say it in an op-ed, and the American media's reaction is, yeah, okay, we understand your point of view. Now, Rick Santelli, getting onto this whole IRS targeting of patriot groups, has brought up an interesting repercussion, because now the IRS, because of Obamacare, the IRS is directly tied in with your health care. And up until now, they're targeting patriot groups for their taxes. What happens when they start making these decisions about your health care based on your political affiliation? We're sorry, you disagreed with the president. You don't get to get that heart bypass operation that you need. And so people need to be very upset about what the IRS has been doing. And obviously, you know, the White House is already trying to backpedal from it. Obama is on record, as of today. He's on record saying he had no idea the IRS was doing this before last Friday. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's weapons of mass destruction to sell you here. I have talked before about how modern cars, I think, are a little over-computerized, a little too gadget-happy. And don't get me wrong, I love technology when it works. But I miss the days of a car that was just an engine, transmission, steering wheel, brakes, and you drove around and you felt the road. And I'm not alone in this. Jeremy Clarkson over on Top Gear, he hates all these traction control systems where the computer's trying to drive the car for you. And here is a good example of this. This is a story that came out of the Daily Mail, where this woman was in a car when its engine exploded. And she turns off the engine and goes to get out of the car, only to find the burglar alarm system has misinterpreted the engine fire as an attempt to break into the car and has locked all the doors. And she can't get out. And she had to literally turn the engine back on. This is an engine that's already on fire. And she had to turn the engine back on in order to clear the alarm to get out of the car. And she got out of the car just seconds before the entire car exploded. I don't want a little computer in the car making my decisions for me, especially if it's running anything by Microsoft. Now then, let's see. Apparently down in New Orleans, the police are conducting a door-to-door search looking for the perpetrators in the shooting. And again, we've got a video showing one of the guys. And he's not Arab, and that's why it's not going to get a huge amount of coverage there. Let's see. We already talked about leukemia. Apparently, a man with a bomb has taken City Hall in Michigan hostage. That's still developing. Getting back to the climate gate, we were talking about all this ice that came on shore from the Great Lakes and is destroying homes in Minnesota. This in mid-May, summer is just weeks away, and Minnesota homes are being destroyed by ice. They're still out there. Tornado activity in the United States, and remember, because of that unique confluence of the Rockies, the Appalachians, the Gulf of Mexico, we get more tornadoes than pretty much any place else on planet Earth. And tornado activity is now at a 60-year low. And remember, the global warming cult was out there saying that global warming was going to produce wilder, more extreme weather, and it's yet another one of their predictions that has not come to pass. Now, over here in Hawaii, we have a big thing with Monsanto ourselves, and there are protests now getting organized on all of the islands because Monsanto may be selling their developed GMO products around the world, but they come out here to Hawaii to test them. And there are Monsanto farm plots on most of these islands. There's a couple up here on the north part of Oahu where they're putting the crops that aren't yet ready for public release. And they bring them out here because if there's a really bad accident, they feel it's contained. It's just Hawaii. It's just a little tiny place. And the local Hawaiian population is very upset over the potential damage from these GMO pollens to the indigenous plant species. And they're very angry with the local government, which has accepted Monsanto's campaign donations to look the other way, while these potentially very dangerous genetic experiments are just planted out in the open. They're not even in greenhouses. It's not a sealed, contained environment. It's just a field. And there's a fence around it, and that's it. Bees can get in there to the pollen. Birds can get in there and transfer the seeds. The wind can blow it all over the place. And as I was saying before earlier in the show, this is the most dangerous technology humans have ever played with. And it's being deployed in an extraordinarily reckless manner. When you have a nuclear reactor that melts down, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima, you can cover it over and that's the end of it. But if you make a mistake in the DNA, it will be everywhere. There was a case some years ago when scientists were trying to basically make sure they had samples of all the natural plants to save in seed vaults ahead of the GMO revolution. And they went up into the highest mountains of Mexico looking for wild maize, the original version of corn before it was cultivated. And they found out even that wild maize at the tops of the mountains had already been contaminated by pollen from GMO corn. So it's everywhere. And we look at some of the things they're playing with, like the epicite gene that causes the corn that it is in to produce a spermicide, where if you are eating that corn, you will be unable to reproduce. If that breaks into the wild, you're looking potentially at an extinction level event. And they don't seem to care. It's just the next product, the next stockholders report, and that's it. There are worldwide protests planned against Monsanto for May 25th. All around the world, people are very angry. They're very worried about this reckless disregard for safety and health from these products. People are still concerned that GMO pollen is a major cause of bee colony collapse disorder. And apparently 1/3 of U.S. honeybee colonies died this last winter. 1/3. If you don't have the bees, your crops won't pollinate. Maybe this was Monsanto's goal all along. Because if you can't grow your farm crops the old-fashioned natural way, well, by golly, Monsanto's going to be there with a pre-pollinated, pre-fertilized, ready-to-go seed for you to buy on credit. Amazing stuff here. Now, we have been talking a long time about prescription antidepressants and medication. And there's an interesting article over bigthink.com where they're basically saying this idea of a brain chemical imbalance doesn't really exist. Everybody's brain is different. And this idea of saying this is the normal average across all brains and anybody who is not at that average is suffering a chemical imbalance for which we're going to prescribe a medication. Hundreds of billions of dollars in Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, Celexa, and we already know from SSRIstories.com that these medications can provoke acts of extreme violence and suicide in the people taking them. But they're still out there on the market because they make money. It's easier to blame the guns. By the way, there is a very, very funny video we linked to at whatreallyhappened.com about take 10 pills and you'll be fine. And if you have not seen it, take a moment to go over there and watch it. It will fracture you. It is funny. It is. It's from the Capitol Steps people. And they're basically talking about how we're just taking all these medications. I don't even know what for. I just like the packaging. It's amazing, amazing stuff over there. Little story out of Los Angeles. This is actually from a week or so ago, but it's worth mentioning. You've seen these little portable electronic signs they'll put up by the side of the road saying left lane closed ahead, right lane closed ahead. Somebody apparently near the University of Southern California was able to hack into one of those signs that set up a message that the LAPD was conducting anal probes ahead, which caused a bit of a traffic snarl. Little benign kind of hack there. Meanwhile, over at the U.S. Department of Labor, their website was infected with malware. Somebody hacked in U.S. government website and loaded it up with all kinds of nasties to download onto the computers of people who are going to the U.S. Department of Labor to try and find out what's going on with the job market. Now, Microsoft, even as it gets ready to retool Windows 8 to get rid of that tile default interface, they're launching a new project called Mohoro, where your Windows desktop is available to you not on your own computer, but as a service. The whole industry is trying to go back to the model of giant mainframe computers owned by the corporations, and what you have in your hand, whether it's your desktop computer, your smartphone, or your tablet, is nothing more than a content delivery terminal. You don't have your own data at hand. It's on the cloud. They want to return to that model because obviously if it's all on these giant servers, the government can come in and look at everything you're doing. They're trying to find some way to discourage you from keeping your own private data in your own private hands. I would not trust that cloud at all, given the abuses we have seen by this government against your private data. And it's not like I have something to hide, but I don't want some government geek poring over the photos I've taken of my wife and I as we go through our adventures in life. It's none of their business. I am a private person. Privacy is an instinct. We don't want the entire world to know what we're doing, even if what we're doing is completely benign. It's just not their business. And that is a normal, natural, human instinct to keep your private life private. And I know from the other side we're always hearing this thing, if you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to be afraid of. Well, if that's true, then let's make it a two-way street. Let's have everything that the White House is doing on a public server where we can scrutinize it. Let's guarantee that we have as many TV cameras watching the police as the police have watching us. Let's have citizens have drones flying around the windows of Congress peeking in without a warrant. When this was a nation of laws, the laws applied to everybody equally. We've lost that. The new model is we ordinary citizens have no right to privacy at all in our medical records, in our private lives, in our love lives, anything, but by golly, Congress needs secrecy. The White House needs secrecy. It's all in the national security's interest. By the way, getting back to that selling as a service, Adobe, who I'm never planning on going near against after that disaster with Creative Studio 5, they are now going to relaunch all of their Creative Studio products as a monthly subscription service. And again, you will not have the apps on your own machine. I think they're charging $30 a month, which is reasonable. It's just in principle this idea that you have to be connected to the Internet to use your apps, which means people who will take their laptops and go out to someplace like Walden Pond to find their inspiration are going to be out of luck, although by now probably Walden Pond has Wi-Fi. But it's this idea that you cannot do anything without being connected to the Internet, which means you're automatically open to surveillance. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment before we head on out of here. Even as Israel is screaming at Stephen Hawking for basically bringing the Palestinian apartheid issue to the attention of the world, Israeli airports are now embarking on a program to sort passengers with Jewish stickers and Arab stickers, which is like one step down from making them sew little colored triangles on their clothing. Amazing, amazing stuff. Meanwhile, Mayor Bloomberg, fresh from his victory banning large soft drinks, is apparently taking $294 million of the money allocated for Storm Sandy's recovery and diverting it to climate change projects. It's just a money-making scam. Yes, we should rebuild these homes, but after all, the storm was caused by global warming, so we're going to take the money that you were going to use to build your homes, and we're going to put it into these projects to fight global warming. We'll tell that to the people up in Minnesota who are dealing with an iceberg in their living room this morning. All righty, we're almost to the end of the show here. I want to go back and recap Benghazi and IRS Gate. It's a double whammy. And I imagine Obama, if he's not already on SSRI antidepressants, he's probably starting up right about now. The use of the IRS as a tool of political repression basically tells us all. It's about control. It's not about revenue. It's not about funding the government. The government can't live within its own budget anyway, which is why we're hopelessly mired in all this debt to the private central bank. But this is an impeachable offense. It was one of the articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon. And we need to stay focused on that because it calls into doubt the legitimacy not just of the Obama administration, but the entire taxing system and its mother, the Federal Reserve. It is time to take some good, strong looks at the legality and constitutionality of this system of national economics. And we need to stay on this. It is a huge scandal. And we need to stay on this right now. We, the American people, who have felt the brunt of the wrath of the Internal Revenue Service for all these years, have a legitimate reason now to stand up and say, we don't think you are what you claim to be. Not when you go out and you target the patriot groups for special abuse. At the same time, you're cutting back enforcement and audits against the big corporations by 18%. Now, with regard to Benghazi, regardless of what really happened, whether my theory about a staged political stunt is true or not, we now know a cover-up is involved. The editing of the talking points, the intimidation of witnesses, this supposed to be secret meeting that happened Friday with representatives of the top 14 news organizations. The White House is the same White House that screams they're the most transparent administration in history is trying to manage the story to their own benefit. They're lying about something. It almost doesn't really matter what it is. We need to stay focused on these two growing scandals. That's it for our show. Going to be back here tomorrow. Please, between now and tomorrow, make a point of going out to your social media, your network of friends, your family. We know Americans are starting to ask the important questions. We need to invite them in here where they can find the answers. Until tomorrow, aloha, America.